Everything you've been told about addiction is wrong. And the proof came from an experiment with rats, a paradise, and a water bottle laced with morphine. What if the reason you can't stop scrolling, can't stop drinking, can't stop reaching for that one thing you swore you'd quit has nothing to do with your willpower? What if your failure is actually a perfectly normal response to the environment you're trapped in? For decades, we treated addicts as either morally weak or neurologically broken. We said their brains were hijacked, their reward circuits fried, their willpower defective. But one psychologist's experiment shattered every single one of those assumptions. And once you understand what he found, you will never look at addiction the same way again. In the late 1970s, a psychologist named Bruce Alexander at Simon Fraser University in Canada started asking a dangerous question. He looked at the classic addiction experiments that shaped everything we believed about drugs and thought something was deeply wrong. Here's how those experiments worked. You take a single rat, you lock it alone in a tiny cage, you give it 2 water bottles. One is plain water, the other is water laced with morphine. The result was always the same. The rat would obsessively drink the drugged water, consuming more and more until its body broke down. The scientific world looked at this and declared that the chemical power of drugs hijacks the brain. Case closed. Addiction is a chemical prison, and willpower is the only key. But Bruce Alexander saw something everyone else missed. What if the rat wasn't addicted to the drug? What if it was addicted to relief from a miserable, lonely, empty cage? He immediately designed a new experiment, and what he built became one of the most legendary studies in the history of psychology. He called it Rat Park. Instead of a cramped metal cage, Alexander constructed an enormous enclosure, roughly 200 times the floor space of a standard laboratory cage. He filled it with cedar shavings, tunnels to explore, wheels to run on, and toys to play with. He stocked it with plenty of food, but here is what mattered most. He filled it with other rats, males and females living together, grooming each other, mating, playing, building the kind of social bonds that rats are wired to need. Then he placed the same 2 water bottles inside Rat Park, plain water and morphine-laced water. The exact same choice, the exact same drug. The results destroyed decades of assumptions. The rats in Rat Park barely touched the morphine water. They tried it occasionally, the way you might take a sip of something and put it down. But they overwhelmingly chose plain water. They chose their friends. They chose play. They chose connection. But here's where it gets even more shocking. Alexander took rats that had already been caged alone and force-fed morphine for 57 straight days. Rats that were fully physically dependent on the drug, and moved them into Rat Park. These rats experienced some trembling and mild withdrawal symptoms, but they voluntarily chose the plain water. They chose to endure the discomfort of withdrawal rather than stay numbed in a world that finally felt worth living in. Let that sink in. Rats that were already addicted chose sobriety when their environment changed. Now let me ask you something uncomfortable. Look at your own life. Picture a 20-something living alone in a tiny apartment in a massive city. She comes home from work exhausted, collapses into bed, and scrolls through her phone until 3 in the morning. She stares at curated highlight reels of other people's lives and feels the slow burn of inadequacy. The next morning, she hates herself for it. Why am I so pathetic? Why can't I put down this stupid little machine? But her brain isn't broken. She is simply a rat in a cage. And that phone is the only bottle of morphine water available to her. Modern society has engineered the perfect isolation experiment, and we are all the subjects. We are connected to thousands of followers, but have no one to truly talk to. Our systems reward productivity and competition, locking each of us into our own individual cage, running on our own individual wheel. And when the loneliness and the anxiety become too much, we reach for the only relief within arm's length: the screen, the shopping cart, the bottle, the scroll. So let me ask the real question. Is your addiction really a failure of willpower? Or is your life a cage where the drugged water is the only source of pleasure available? If you're still not convinced, consider this. During the Vietnam War, approximately 20% of American soldiers stationed in Vietnam became addicted to heroin. The United States government was terrified. They expected tens of thousands of heroin addicts flooding back into American cities, creating a public health catastrophe. But something astonishing happened. Researcher Lee Robbins tracked these soldiers after they returned home and found that over 95% of them quit heroin on their own, without any formal treatment whatsoever. They simply stopped. They came home to their families, their friends, their communities, and the need for the drug evaporated. They left the cage of war and returned to their own version of Rat Park. Now think about what this means for you. Addiction is not a disease of the brain. It is a signal from the brain. It is your nervous system screaming that your environment is unbearable and desperately searching for any source of dopamine to survive. The addicted brain is not malfunctioning. It is functioning exactly as designed in an environment that offers no real nourishment. Johann, in his groundbreaking book, Chasing the Scream, put it in words that changed the entire conversation. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. This changes everything about the question we should be asking ourselves. Stop asking, what is wrong with me? Start asking, what connections are missing from my life? Your brain is not your enemy. It is a survival machine doing exactly what evolution programmed it to do, searching for dopamine in a world that isn't giving it enough natural sources. The problem was never inside you. The problem was always outside you. We need to stop whipping ourselves with willpower and start redesigning our cages into something that resembles Rat Park. And here's the thing, it doesn't have to be dramatic. It can start impossibly small. Making eye contact with a stranger, having a real conversation without looking at your phone, reaching out to someone you haven't spoken to in months, offering a word of genuine comfort to someone who's struggling. These tiny acts of connection are the cedar shavings and tunnels and running wheels of your own personal Rat Park. When you step out of isolation and into genuine human connection, the chains of addiction begin to loosen on their own. Now, you might be thinking, I'm already in too deep. I've been in this cage too long. Can I really come back from this? But remember what happened to those rats. After 57 days of forced morphine dependence, they still chose plain water when their world changed. Humans have that same capacity and more. Your brain has a staggering ability to heal itself when the environment shifts. You are not permanently broken. You were simply left in a cage with nothing but drugged water for far too long. So open the door of that cage. Stop listening to the voice that says you are weak, that you are broken, that you deserve this. Start looking for the hands reaching out to pull you into something better. That is not just hopeful thinking. That is the science. Connection rewires the brain. Community heals what isolation destroys. The moment you walk out of the prison of self-blame, real change begins. You are not alone. You were never alone. Your connection was just temporarily interrupted, and now you know the truth. And once you know, you can't unknow it. So I'll leave you with this one question. Are you building your own Rat Park right now? Or are you still locked inside a cage, reaching for the only bottle available? Your environment shapes your choices. Change your environment, and your life will finally begin to change with it. This is Mind Grove, where your mindset grows.